My name is Kerry Wright, and I'd like to welcome you to this Legal Aid New South Wales law webinar on elder abuse, your family and your home. I work in the Community Legal Education branch at Legal Aid New South Wales, and I'm here today with Mary, Richard and Lynn from the Legal Aid New South Wales Elder Abuse Service. Hi, everyone.
Hi.
Hi.
Morning.
So I want to begin by acknowledging and paying our respects to the traditional owners and custodians on whose land we're broadcasting from today, and to extend that respect to any Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander people joining the webinar today or viewing the recording. The information today is general legal information only, not legal advice, but we'll tell you where you can send your clients for specific advice on any of the topics we talk about today. And I also want to mention that there's two handouts on your control panel, a copy of the presentation we're using today, as well as the 5-step toolkit that we'll mention for community workers around elder abuse. So you're welcome to download those from your control panel. So Mary, Richard and Lynn, can you tell us a bit about your roles at Legal Aid New South Wales, and also Mary about the Elder Abuse Service? So do you want to start, Mary?
Thanks, Kerry, and welcome to everyone that's listening today. So my name's Mary Lovelock. I'm the Senior Solicitor in the Elder Abuse Service, which runs from the Gosford office of Legal Aid New South Wales. And I'd like to introduce my colleagues, Richard McCullough, who's the other lawyer in the service. Hi, Richard.
Good
morning. And Lynn McLennan, who's the social worker in our team, and sometimes I refer to her as the glue in the team. So just a little bit of context about our service. So in 2017, the Australian Law Reform Commission did a review around elder abuse, probably in acknowledgement of our ageing population. And there were a number of recommendations that came out of that review. And one of those recommendations resulted in about $18 million of Commonwealth money being used to set up elder abuse services across Australia. So the Elder Abuse Service at Legal Aid New South Wales is one of 5 elder abuse services, the other ones being in Tassie, in Victoria, in South Australia, and one in the Kimberley region in Western Australia. So we're the only elder abuse service in New South Wales, but we acknowledge the work of other community legal centres that do provide services to older people, in particular the Seniors' Rights Service, and we stand on the shoulders of organisations like Caxton in Brisbane that have really been leaders in providing services to older people. So a little bit about our service. It's a 3-year funded trial. We started in September 2019. So we run for about another 15 months. It's a multidisciplinary team, so 2 solicitors and 1 social worker and an admin support person. We talk about providing tertiary wraparound service, and basically the tertiary bit means that our clients often don't walk through the door of our service. So we rely on stakeholders, we rely on you as community workers, if you're out there listening, to refer clients to us. In terms of eligibility, our clients need to live on the Central Coast, they need to be over 65 or over 50 years for our Aboriginal clients, and be at risk of or experiencing elder abuse. Thanks, Kerry.
Okay, thanks, Mary. So what I'm going to do now is launch a quick poll for our participants. And that poll is asking you the question, have you ever suspected elder abuse was occurring to a client or family member? And we want you to let us know, yes, but I wasn't sure what to do, yes, and I reported it, or no. So just getting people to complete that poll, and I will close it as soon as I've got everyone's responses. So it looks like people are participating, which is great. So I'll close that now and share the results with you all.
Ah,
So you can see that, well, equally, yes, the
yeah,
two yes answers, and half of people said no, but half, yeah, over half said yes, and
it's
a third of
interesting.
them said they yes, but they weren't sure what to do. So that's this webinar is very timely, I think.
Thanks, Carrie.
Um,
So,
yeah,
the
so I'm
topics.
just yes, go ahead, Mary. Sorry.
Um, so the topics we're going to cover today, we just want to make it really relevant to people that are working with older people. So we thought we'd give a bit of a peek into what we're seeing in our service. We'll give you some statistics around who the perpetrators that we're seeing, what are the big issues. We look at those big issues through the lens of a couple of case studies that we're going to talk about. A little bit about what are the red flags of elder abuse. And for those of you that work with older people, I'm going to talk a little bit about how you might help or support a client who may be experiencing elder abuse. We've got links to resources, and then we hope that this is really interactive, and at any time if a question pops into your head, we're really happy for you to sort of put it in the chat box, and Kerry will feed it to us as the panelists. Thanks very much, Kerry.
Okay, so next slide coming up. Mary, do you want to tell us what is
Yeah,
elder abuse?
so I like to use a big, wide definition, which is, any action or inaction that causes an older person harm or distress. And the tagline in that is within a relationship of trust. And it's within the relationship of trust that really defines elder abuse. And for those of you that are listening, you'll probably acknowledge that sadly most elder abuse occurs within the family, which makes it both challenging and heartbreaking for our older clients.
Hmm. And what is this research telling us, Mary, about New South Wales?
Well, one of the reasons that we've been funded is because elder abuse is misunderstood. There's not enough awareness around what it is, and that many people don't report elder abuse. And with our ageing population, it's something that we need to grapple with as a community to better understand what elder abuse is, and get better ways of working with older people.
Hmm. Okay, so I'm bringing up those statistics that you wanted to share with our audience.
Yeah. So what are we seeing? If you've got any comments in relation to what we're seeing, I'm happy to sort of take those comments. I'll just kind of preface these statistics that I put up with the fact that in the main, our clients come to us from community workers and other stakeholders who work with older people. So these statistics kind of really reflect where our clients are coming from, but they kind of broadly align with statistics from the Elder Abuse Hotline in New South Wales and other data collection organisations. So in our service, nearly 2/3 of our clients report financial abuse. Interestingly, at least half of our clients report both financial and psychological abuse together. And if you think about that, it sort of makes sense, because if somebody's standing over you for money, or pressuring you to sign some documents that the older person doesn't want to sign, then that kind of really illustrates that there's both financial and psychological abuse happening. Sadly, but something that you probably already know, is that 80% of the elder abuse that we see arises from a close family member. And sadly, unsurprisingly, about half of those abusers, about 2/3 of those abusers are adult children. Just interestingly, I was talking with my colleagues the other day because I was going through our data, and I was just making this observation that when we're looking at adult children as being abusers, most adult sons are involved in psychological or physical abuse, and most adult daughters are recorded as perpetrating financial abuse. I don't know what that says, but it was just an observation that I made when I was looking at the data that we had.
Yes, interesting. We don't have any questions as yet, so I'll move forward onto our next slide where, Mary, I think you and Lynn were going to talk to us about what are the big issues you're seeing.
Yeah, so look, we've only been up and running for about 15 months, but some trends are clearly starting to emerge. Most of the issues that we see are around money and housing. And when I think about that, a couple of things come to mind. And one is that sort of makes sense because often older people have built up considerable assets. They might be reaching a point in time where their cognition is declining, so they become a little bit more vulnerable and they start relying on other people. And my third observation is it's kind of a reflection of the society we're living in at the moment, where housing has become so unaffordable that younger people are relying on the older people in their family to either assist them with housing or, you know, leave their house to them. And so there's what's called inheritance impatience that we see a lot of. In terms of like money problems, they reflect like a large spectrum from big problems, which is, you know, pressuring an older person into going guarantor for a loan, or, you know, in some cases we've seen adult children fraudulently transfer property worth millions of dollars to themselves, right down to like smaller problems where you might have a carer or a helper that's kind of embedded themselves into the older person's life, and they're doing the shopping for them, you know, fortnightly, and taking their ATM card, and at the end of shopping they're just sort of helping themselves to an extra $20 or $30. Or it might be the situation where an adult son is standing over their elderly parent for money out of their pension every week. I mean, whether it's big or small, it really diminishes that older person's agency in this world.
Did you have anything to add, Lynn, or?
Look, just also that with that comes a lot of very sort of family dynamics that we see out there. So marrying all that up is, you know, paints a broader picture. There's a lot of guilt and shame and all sorts of things that happen, I guess, within families, and you know, it makes it harder for older people. So yeah,
And we thought, sorry.
No, you're
We
right.
thought that the best way we could really talk about what we're seeing is through the lens of our couple of case studies. And so Lynn and Richard are going to present a couple of case studies that illustrate those particular challenges, and we're going to talk about how our service assisted and generally the barriers that older people might have. So I think Lynn was going to talk to our first case study.
Okay, that's just coming up now, Lynn. Over to you.
Right, so this is Alice's story. Alice is a 70-year-old woman who has been living alone until her 35-year-old son, who we'll call Barry, came to live with her. Soon after he moved in, he became abusive. He has a mental illness and has recently been in custody. Alice wanted him to leave, but was also concerned that he was unwell and had nowhere else to go. Alice asked him to leave, but instead he moved under the house and stayed there. Alice is scared of her son and barricades the house at night. So I think in reading that, maybe if you had any sort of questions or things that you were thinking about, if you wanted to type those things through, I'm going to run through what we did as a service to assist this lady. So I just invite you to think about maybe the kinds of abuse that was happening for Alice, what signs of abuse might you be noticing if you're out there in the community working with this lady. Think about the impact that this kind of abuse on a person might have, and the sort of feelings that she's experiencing throughout this. So I'll go through what we did, and if anybody wants to pop anything up, please do so. So Alice reported experiencing psychological abuse, which is also known as emotional abuse, from her son Barry. He was swearing at Alice and calling her names. He was using threats to harm her and other family members. Alice reported that Barry's behaviour was causing her stress and making her feel really fearful. She wanted Barry to leave, but she was worried for him. Now, she worried that he would become homeless, which he has been in the past. She worried that by reporting what was happening for him, that he would be in trouble with police and breach his parole and return to jail. I was able to explore with Alice what her concerns were in regards to taking further action, as well as to discuss a safety plan that she could put in place and help reduce the risks. Alice was able to identify that she felt a lot of responsibility for what Barry's life, how Barry's life had played out. She was able to identify an underlying guilt that she felt about a childhood trauma that Barry experienced, and how this trauma had led to his poor functioning, poor mental health, drug and alcohol issues, and incarceration. So Alice's overwhelming sense of guilt really had kept her from taking the steps that she wanted to take to keep herself safe, because there was, this dynamic that was really playing out. She just wanted the best for her son, didn't want him into more trouble, but also wanted to keep herself safe in her home and wanted peace back. So as a social worker, I helped Alice to unpack the guilt that she was carrying, to allow her to reflect on her strengths as a parent. For Alice, was to explore ways that she had modelled, like the help-seeking behaviours, the way that she had given her children a space to speak about their life experiences, that she always believed their stories and tried to help them if needed. Alice found many stories that were opposite to the narrative that was in her head. Of feeling that she had let her children down, and her thought that she was not enough nor did enough for them. So the process was really empowering actually for Alice, and helped her understand that she had not failed her children. She changed her narrative and was able to say, I've been there for my son, now he needs to help himself. And she was also able to say, it's okay for me to want my home back, to want peace back in my home, and to not feel scared anymore. So as well as what I was doing as a social worker, solicitor was able to provide the options for what Alice could do in order to get her son off her property. So she was informed about obtaining a harsh legal letter to direct her son to leave, as well as information on AVOs if needed. That was always a last sort of thought for Alice, because she just didn't want her son getting into more trouble. So I explored also with her referrals to other services, such as ongoing counselling for her, as well as drug and alcohol and family support services. As well as discussing these supports with Alice, I spoke to her about other services and supports that could assist her son. This for her was really helpful, because she wanted to know that her son could be assisted as well, that he'd be okay out there. So I was able to speak to her about the son's probation and parole officer, and I was able to obtain permission to speak to the probation and parole officer, and learnt that they were helping Barry with accommodation, something that Alice didn't know about. They also informed us that they had the power to ask him to leave also. So with all the information that Alice had received, she weighed things up and she ultimately decided to pursue the legal options that were provided to her from our servers, as well as to speak to police in case that her son decided not to leave. She spoke to probation and parole and asked them also to assist with asking her son to leave the premises. So we could say that Barry has since left her home and Alice is pleased with the outcome, which has allowed her to feel safe in her home whilst knowing that she did not have to get police involved or an AVO. So both pathways, both of these pathways she was really worried about because she thought that Barry might be reincarcerated. So she was also pleased to know that probation and parole are trying to assist her son with housing, even though she realises that he might not seek that help himself and might not engage with the service. I'll just want to also say that this whole process, for the shortness that it's taken for me to talk about it, actually took 12 months. So it was quite a lengthy process because as a service, we sit where the client is. We talk to them about their goals, their needs, where they are at, and work with them on those, you know, by providing the counselling, by providing the legal options. We work together as a team. The client is part of that team to be able to progress through what feels right for them to feel safe. So that was Alice's story.
Thanks, Lynn. Oh, sorry, did you want to add something, Mary?
Look, when I was just listening to that story, I was just thinking it was a great outcome for this client. And for me, as a solicitor, it's the first time I've worked in a team with a social worker. And it's just opened my eyes to the way you can do things completely differently with a social worker. So the ability to be able to hold Alice in our service for up to 12 months to enable her to work through those family dynamics, which were really keeping her from articulating and realizing what she wanted to happen, has really made all the difference. Yeah.
Great, thank you. We haven't had any comments or questions yet, so we'll keep going. And Richard, you're going to talk to us about Bruce.
Thank you. I'd just like to echo Mary's comments. Being a lawyer, sometimes you see a remedy, an action you can take, and you want to rip in there and do it for the best of your client, but often the social worker just says, woo, just hold back. Let's just check out the family dynamics, because quite often that informs how the situation came through and what the appropriate legal response might be. And that may not be the one the lawyer first comes up with. So let's go to Bruce, 71 years old. 5 years ago, he was persuaded to sell his house and transfer $700,000 to his daughter Trish and her husband. They used the money to purchase a property. Trish promised Bruce that he could live there for the rest of his life and she would care for him. The property was in Trish and her husband's name only. There's an alarm bell. Bruce came to the Elder Abuse Service and said his daughter told him he has to leave the house. Bruce has nowhere to live. Bruce would, in those circumstances, like to go to a retirement village. He may have to go to an aged care facility down the track, but he has no money available to pay for it. So how can the law help? Well, the law could have helped a lot had Bruce sought some advice before going down this path. Often in these situations, the older person fears loneliness. Perhaps they've recently lost their partner and they greatly appreciate the offer of being able to live with family. And as is often the case, it's thought to be a forever proposition. But things go wrong, sometimes quite innocently. Perhaps the daughter or the husband become bankrupt. In steps the trustee for bankruptcy, sells the house, the trustee has no idea about Bruce. He has no recorded ownership. It could be that Trish and the husband, their relationship ends and one seeks a family court order dividing up the property. Again, there's no record of Bruce's contribution to that. So Bruce is in a bad way. If Bruce got this documented before he moved in, and as you can appreciate, at that point, he may have some leverage because Trish and husband would quite like the financial contribution. If he'd used that, a lot of the problems that we see may not eventuate at all. If that happens, what can the law do to remedy it down the track? Well, as you can appreciate, Bruce may be about to lose the roof over his head, his money, if the house is sold. He may even, although he wouldn't have thought about this at the time, he may have other kids and always wanted to leave his estate, say, equally to them. But as you can see, Trish has got her nose in the trough, so to speak, ahead of the others. Should the other siblings find out about that, now you can imagine there'll be much family angst. It may not happen until Bruce has passed away. Still much family angst and not something that he would have intended. So in that situation, the quickest thing we can do is what's called lodge a caveat. And that is simply a thing on the public record that stops Trish or her husband being able to sell or refinance the property without Bruce being involved. In effect, he blocks that from happening. And that's where we can get involved. We put the caveat on. And if Trish and her husband want to keep going down the track of either pushing Bruce out or selling up, then that's where Bruce can step in and go, well, that's all very well, but I want my money back. Similarly, we said that he may want to move out himself anyway, having had this dreadful situation with daughter and husband. So he may want the money back there and then. There may not be an external pressure, but he wants it. And again, that's where court action may be needed if Trish and hubby won't help out. That's very expensive. At the moment, you have to go to the Supreme Court, and that could cost at least $15,000 a day. So the law can help, but it's so much better if it's done before the problem rather than after.
Okay, thanks, Richard. And someone's commented that they see this all the time. So just to let you know that. But someone's written a question here, haven't given away more than $30,000 in 5 years, wouldn't his pension be adversely affected? Is that
Very
something
good
you
question.
can comment on?
Yes, certainly. Centrelink have this policy that if an older person sells their property, gives all their money to a child, exactly as Bruce has done, and moves in, supposedly forever, then that actually doesn't adversely affect their pension. What could do is if Bruce, having sold his house for $700,000, if he sold in Sydney and had been there for 30 years, he's probably walked off with a good lump sum in addition to that. That money going into the bank will attract the means test and perhaps reduce his pension. The second thing to say is that what's called the granny flat interest, which is the exception I mentioned before, if that ends within 5 years for a reason that's foreseeable, Centrelink can reintroduce the means test at that point in time during the 5 years.
Okay.
The other thing that I might say, just add, is that we know that there's certain red flags related to elder abuse. And for those of you that are listening that are working with older people, sometimes a change in residence, selling the house, is kind of a red flag that you might want to look a little bit more closely at. And had Bruce, as Richard pointed out, got some legal advice first, that this might have been avoided completely. So if people that you're working with are about to sell their house or move in with their daughter, and you're working with them as a community worker, it might be a conversation along the line of, have you got some advice about that? That's a big decision to make. You know, you might want to reach out and contact a lawyer or contact Seniors' Rights Service. You know, I mean, if you think that if you do suspect there's some sort of financial abuse going on, contact the Elder Abuse Hotline, or if you're on the Central Coast, our service. Just kind of encourage the client to sort of connect to be able to protect them.
Okay, thanks, Mary. Another question I've got here is the money still classed as the older person's assets? So when they want to go into residential care, it counts towards the bond and fees they need to pay?
That's another good question. It's a slightly technical one.
Right.
I think the 5-year period I referred to would apply. But really, if Bruce wants to go to a nursing home of his choice or a retirement village of his choice, he will have to fight to get that money. Of course, to the extent that he does retrieve the $700,000 and applies that to another residence, be that a home, a village, a nursing home, that money will be exempt in the usual way for a resident, principal residence under the Social Security Act.
Okay. Thank you. Well, they seem to be all our questions so far, but so we might move forward unless, Lynn, you wanted to say anything about this situation with Bruce, or?
Just, I guess, as the social worker on the team, you know, providing that support around that, the emotional issues that are happening there is, yeah, always something really difficult to sort of unpack for someone. You know, they're already in crisis, they're coming to a service, they, you know, all the thoughts that they had about what their future would look like is a very difficult for them to be going through at the same time as trying to take some legal action to have that help back. You know, I think always just being mindful of the difficulties in the family dynamics is really important.
Yeah, and I think Bruce felt pressured into handing over the money to his sort of family, but you know, there may have been other options for Bruce, and had he been allowed to have those conversations, then the outcome might have been completely different. So even though the older person says, yeah, I'm going to move in with my family, it may be because they just haven't really had the opportunity to explore what other options may be available to them. They may be able to stay in the house with more support. It may be that, you know, they know that there's been conflict in their family in the past, but they're just hoping that once they move in, everything is going to be fine, which we know often isn't. So for those of you that are working with older people at that time of transition, there's a lot of conversations that can be had around what an older person's options might be.
Thank you. All right, so the next slide coming up is looking at this psychological abuse. And Lynn, you were going to talk to us about the types and the signs that people might recognise when that's occurring.
Yeah, so we've decided to highlight psychological abuse and financial abuse, which Richard will talk at, because the predominant themes that we're seeing, or types of abuse that we're seeing within the service, and it highlights what we also saw in the scenarios. But out there's also, we should be mindful, and a lot of it does go hand in hand as well. Sometimes you'll have emotional abuse with the physical and the financial abuse, but there's also older people could be experiencing sexual abuse and physical abuse, as well as neglect, which can sometimes be a more harder type of abuse to really pinpoint, I guess. But in terms of the psychological or the emotional abuse, this is a type of abuse that involves action or threat that causes fear of violence isolation, deprivation, humiliation, or powerlessness. Examples might include treating an elderly person like a child, preventing access to services, making threats such as I'll put you in a nursing home, or stop you from seeing loved ones, or telling them they have dementia. Some of the types of emotional abuse that you might see are things such as threatening the older person, blaming the victim, pressuring, bullying or intimidating the older person, humiliating the victim, ridiculing the victim, or ignoring the needs of the older person, just to name a few. Now, some of the signs or the red flags, as Mary spoke about before, when we speak of red flags, some of the things that you might sort of see as a worker out there might be things such as a person's mood might have changed. So you might see, a lowered self-esteem. They might be avoiding eye contact when speaking with you. They might become more teary in just general sort of conversation, that you might be seeing more signs of anxiety or depression or withdrawal. They might become more withdrawn and shy, more shy, sort of around you, not wanting to speak. They may engage in self-injurious behaviours or self-neglect as well. So yeah, these are the sort of things that you might sort of be seeing in the community, going, well, what's going on here? There's been a big shift in that person. So these are some of the important things to have a look at and to sort of be mindful. And it might just be some of these themes might also, or red flags might also be contributing factors of other illnesses or things that might be happening for the older person. But we need to sort of try and separate that as well sometimes, and see through a different lens as to maybe something else is playing out here that we don't know about. So spending that time with somebody, being able to, gently talk about what might be happening is a helpful thing.
Thanks, Lynn. I do have someone's typed in a question, and basically it's about their service delivery model, which is mostly over the phone. And they're asking whether you have some tips on how to recognise elder abuse when they only have very limited scope of contact with their clients, and there's no kind of body language, I guess, because they're not having that face-to-face contact. I don't know if one of you has any tips there about that phone advice scenario and when dealing with clients.
Look, during COVID, our service kind of moved from face-to-face advice to phone advice, and I have a lot of concerns about it, because taking away those visual clues takes out a big chunk of your ability to sort of identify elder abuse. Okay, so for me, I'd be thinking about things like a stilted conversation, a conversation that might indicate that somebody else is in the room, a client that all of a sudden doesn't, like, ends the conversation quickly because somebody else might be there, a client who appears confused or is not answering the question that I'm asking. That may be an indication that they're not willing to, that they don't feel safe enough. Help me out, Lynn.
Yeah, I was just thinking too, like what we talked about, maybe they're more teary. I guess you could be asking more specifically some questions around this. There's some really good information in Seniors' Rights, I believe, website around some of the sort of subtle questions that you could be asking a client over the phone to just trying to elicit that information about what might be happening for them. But it is, much more trickier, obviously, when we don't have all those other bits of information, adding up for someone, because we tend to look at the whole, of the person to be able to make, a good assessment of the situation. But there definitely are some good things that I can post up afterwards or send out with the slides.
Yeah, I was thinking about that. I was also thinking about just in favour of having face-to-face. Our meeting last week with the Elder Abuse Service in South Australia, where all their interaction with clients is face-to-face. Yeah, so I hear your pain in terms of having to identify elder abuse over the telephone, and we'll endeavour to find the best resources and be able to post them out in relation to that, because I think it's, yeah, for a lot of services, you know, with COVID coming and going, and having to pivot our services to telephone, it presents particular challenges for older people.
Yes, yes. So we can follow up our participants with any additional resource on that topic. So we'll move forward on to financial abuse. And Richard, you were going to talk about that type of elder abuse.
Yes, thank you. And I wanted to start by saying the examples Lynn gave of psychological abuse are highly relevant because very often that pattern of behaviour is a precursor to financial abuse, and sometimes it's the means by which it is perpetrated. So very generally, financial abuse, the illegal or improper use of an older person's property or finances by a person of trust, and normally that is without any form of consent, and sometimes it's through apparent consent because of the types of conduct that Lynn outlined. So how might you see this? There might be a certain squalor of the older person's living conditions because the money they would otherwise have had has been siphoned off. In cases of what we would call theft or fraud, accessing bank accounts, that can happen by little amounts over a long period of time, so it's not all that obvious, or it might be much more obvious. Sometimes it's hard to pry, but if you can ask questions that might elicit answers that suggest how this has happened. An example of something it is often results in a larger, I'll say, theft of money is the abuse of a power of attorney. And you're probably familiar with these documents, and of their nature, they confer a lot of trust upon a person. And in 90% of the cases, that's great. It's the way it should work. And if an older person is worried about loss of capacity down the track, it's the logical thing to do. But unfortunately, it can be a common means of financial abuse because it's a legal authority to access the person's bank account, for example. A few years ago, there was a case where those facts happened, a lot of use of an older person's bank account, and this went to court, and the perpetrator said, "Oh, I didn't use a power of attorney, ha." But the court pointed out that by virtue of having this access to someone's bank account, that creates the legal duty of loyalty, if you like. So the absence of a power of attorney doesn't get the perpetrator off the hook. One common phenomenon is where the perpetrator of financial elder abuse creates a relationship of grooming. So it may not be quite as bad as the circumstances that Lynn was outlining. It's just as bad in the result. And it really works through a relationship of undermining someone's confidence, the older person's confidence, and then grooming them, flattering them. And that can happen from adult children, even neighbours, and in one reported case, the hairdresser. So they just go about in a much more subtle way, but with the same end result. It's difficult, probably for you, other than I mentioned the case of squalor that an older person might be gradually experiencing. It's difficult to see the signs of this sort of thing. On the other hand, if we go back to Bruce's situation where he has moved in with daughter and you're providing care to Bruce and you notice lots of new plush furniture and giant televisions, well, that might be an indication that is actually being funded by Bruce.
sometimes you might have a regular outing with an older person, and all of a sudden they say something like, "Oh, I can't come this week." And if you inquire further, they might say, "Look, I can't afford it this week." So, like, some changes in financial circumstances might be a little bit obvious. They might have had their electricity or their phone cut off. They no longer have a mobile contact. They may seem a little bit vague or confused about finances, where in the past they'd seemed, really on the ball with it. So they're kind of like signs that you can look out for in relation to financial abuse.
Okay, thank you. So what to do if you suspect abuse? So Mary, you going to take us this one?
Yeah. So hopefully by the examples of Bruce and Alice, you'll see that our approach is a human rights-based approach, where we put the client at the centre of all our actions, and it's about supporting the older client to achieve what they want to, what they consider as an important outcome. And so always ask the older person what they want to do. I mean, with our clients, we're always, asking them, what do you think would be a good outcome? What would you like to happen? And then our role is, as much as possible, to be able to support them to achieve that result. It's discussing referral options. Sometimes there might be other services that can help. Elder abuse is a complex problem, and it's a problem that involves like a multifaceted approach. And in our service, it's the combination of having a social worker and lawyers working together that helps support our clients achieve good outcomes. But we regularly bring in other people, people that can help with, financial counsellors, my aged care, the other host of community services that can help support our client. So don't think it's something that you have to fix yourself. Sometimes it's about timing. And so it might be about leaving information with the older person to help them take time to feel comfortable to reach out to a service. Similar to domestic violence, elder abuse can challenge the very dynamic foundations of a family, and it's not something that an older person is going to take to, immediately. They're going to need time to sort of think about what it means for them. The other one I've got down here is inform your manager and document. So for those of you working in organisations where you suspect elder abuse or you're required to report elder abuse, it's a conversation that you have with your manager. It might just be like a suspicion that you've got, but being able to talk through that with your manager, who may ask questions that may lead you to get more information to confirm your suspicion, is the way to go. And the other thing is, just don't be judgmental. So I see Kerry's just brought up that it's okay to act on suspicion, but it should always be about what the older person wants. And it just comes back to my first comment that you put the older person at the centre of your work.
Okay, thank you. Did you want to add to that, Lynn? No? Someone's asked a question, is there a mandatory report requirement for elder abuse?
I think it depends what organisation you work in. For me, no. For Lynn, as a social worker?
No. Still
No.
at this, no.
In aged care facilities, I think there is. Richard, do you know?
I believe there is for certain conduct. I don't think it's related to financial elder abuse. It's more to do with physical abuse.
Yeah. It's a little. So the answer is it's a little bit patchy.
And then the next question is, what does the manager then do? I guess that's your last point there, Mary, about informing the manager and document it.
Well, all aged care facilities have to have a policy in relation to responding to elder abuse, and part of the recommendations of the Australian Law Reform Commission review in 2017 was that all public service agencies have policies in relation to elder abuse. So you think about it, if you're working in an aged care facility or you're a community worker and you identify elder abuse and you speak about it with your manager, the referral policy might be, if you're outside of the Central Coast, to contact the Elder Abuse Hotline. So in New South Wales, the Ageing and Disability Commission is the point of contact that oversees the Elder Abuse Hotline. And the Elder Abuse Hotline, that's a national number. And when you call that number, you're directed to the relevant state organisation.
Okay, thank you. I'm just conscious of time, so just to let people know, we've probably got about another 15 minutes, so we'll probably go over to about 10 past 11, but we are recording the webinar, so if people need to leave, they can watch the end at another time. So we'll just go now to talking about the different roles of the lawyers and social workers in the elder abuse service. Someone did ask a question though, are you now seeing people face to face or are you only over the phone still, Mary?
We're trying to see people more face to face. That's the model that we would prefer. And we also acknowledge that we've got to meet clients where they are. So, you know, if clients are in hospital, we try and see them in hospital. If they're in a community centre, we try and see them in a community centre. But in the first instance, it's often over the telephone, and then we gauge what the client's needs are, and we try and meet them face to face. Okay, COVID changes all the time. So this is just a little bit of a slide about what we actually do, and hopefully we've kind of illustrated that through our case studies. So, you know, as lawyers in the team, once clients are eligible for our service, we can help them with a range of legal problems with power of attorney and guardianship, housing, ABOs, the reporting of abuse, financial abuse, and problems with Centrelink. So just a range of legal issues, whereas our social worker provides ongoing counselling, facilitated family meetings, reducing isolation by reconnecting clients, and helping to decipher what Richard and I say.
Good point.
Yeah.
It's not on the slide, but we know, oh yes, plain language.
Could I just chime in there? Just in terms of the legal remedies, another one it's worth mentioning is the Guardianship Division of NCAT, the New South Wales Civil and Administrative Tribunal, particularly in the case of powers of attorney and guardian and financial abuse, not really in terms of Bruce's situation, but more in the nature of an ongoing relationship where there is trust but financial abuse. NCAT can be very useful there because unlike going to the terribly daunting and expensive Supreme Court, NCAT is cheap, fast, and relatively informal. So if you come across a situation where you think there is ongoing financial elder abuse, it might be by a power of attorney, but not necessarily, NCAT can be the place to go because they will review the situation, they will contact all relevant parties. Usually it requires some evidence that the older person to a degree has lost capacity, not necessarily full-on instance of dementia. It just might be a compromised ability to make sensible financial decisions or health or accommodation decisions for them. So please bear that in mind. That is a very accessible legal form of intervention to stop this happening, and in the result, the tribunal may simply appoint a more trusted family member as what's called a financial manager, and they will take the reins off the power of attorney or the person who is otherwise helping themselves to the bank account and appoint a person as a financial manager, and that person will be accountable to the public trustee. So it's a good circuit breaker of legal effect to ongoing financial elder abuse.
Okay, thank you, Richard. So now we're going to go through where you can get help. So Mary, you were going to talk to this slide.
I'll just quickly touch on the resources that are available. So Compass is a national website on elder abuse. It's a fantastic resource on all things elder abuse. We've got some material on there, but it is a great place to go to. You've got Seniors' Rights Service in New South Wales, Older Persons Advocacy Network, the New South Wales Ageing and Disability Abuse Helpline, but on their website, they've got some fantastic resources for those of you that are looking for training resources for your organisation. They've got some fantastic webinars on what is elder abuse and how to spot elder abuse that they've recently put together. And then National Aboriginal Community Controlled Health Organisation, as well as the New South Wales Elder Abuse 5-Step Toolkit, which is attached as a handout.
Yes, and this information about these resources and organisations is also in the email that will follow this webinar, so people will get that, plus it's in your handout of the presentation. So I, just before we get to the end, want to give a quick plug for a new podcast series that the Legal Aid New South Wales Community Legal Education team have put together with the Elder Abuse Service, I should add. Episode 1 is talking to Mary and others in the service. So this is called Conversations. It's a podcast series for community and health workers about elder abuse. And you can see there there's 5 episodes up there, and a 6th episode will be going up soon, which is a conversation between Mary and Dr. Kay Patterson, the Age Discrimination Commissioner with the Australian Human Rights Commission. So you can find our podcast series on Podbean. It's called Law for Community Workers on the Go. So if you want to listen to those short podcasts episodes about hard conversations and elder abuse, we recommend them to you. So this is our nearly last slide. So Mary, did you have any final messages, and then we can have a look through any questions?
I love this image. Now, we've spoken a lot about older people in terms of being, vulnerable and being exploited. But I just want to remind everyone that if we're lucky, we're all going to get old. And aging has a lot of benefits. One of the great benefits is you're liberated and you care less about what other people think. And there's a lot of research to say that older people in generally are happier than that crazy life you live in your 40s where you're running after kids or parents or something like that. And the other thing that comes to mind around this slide is the important role that we have as community workers and people who work with older people to respect older people's wishes. We spoke about that human rights model, and around connection, because we know that connection is something that really reduces elder abuse. And elder abuse, it's not just an older person's problems, it's a community problem. And this lovely photograph reminds me of the benefits of getting older and the benefits of connections. So I'll just leave you with that thought.
Thank you. So Mary, we had a couple of questions before the webinar, which I'll read out to you, and as well there's a couple sitting here to ask you. So one of the questions was, when a sibling is emotionally and verbally abusing the elderly parent they live with, the elderly person owns the house, what can another family member do about it without proof?
Well, I'll have a little crack at this one, but I'm happy for Richard and Lynn to jump in as well. Well, let's think about what we've spoken about today. So what does the older person want? So first of all, we know that connection reduces, so isolation is a risk factor for elder abuse. And so connecting with that older person and making sure that you are part of their life, if that's possible. I know that sometimes older people are isolated from their family members, but trying to maintain your connection with that older person, trying to find out what they want. I think what Richard spoke about was that if you are really concerned about the welfare of an older person and they're living with a sibling, then you can make an application to the Guardianship Tribunal as an interested party. And I think what Richard said is really true. The Guardianship Tribunal will shine a spotlight on what's happening in that older person's life. The Guardianship Tribunal has the authority to make decisions around appointing people as guardians or financial managers. So a guardian is someone that makes decisions about a person's lifestyle, so medical treatment, and where they live and who they see, whereas a financial manager is someone that deals solely with the older person's finances. So if you're really concerned, you can make an application to the Guardianship Tribunal. Richard, did you want to say anything more about that?
Yes, just to chime in, that's quite right, Mary. And if you get what's called a guardian appointed in this situation by NCAT, which sounds like the right way to go, they can specifically have a power to do with access. So if there is a child who's moved back in and it's clearly not in the interest of the older person and they want that person gone, a guardian does have the power to enlist the services, even of the police, to implement the decision that guardian's made that is in the best interests of mum. Just one other thing is, in terms of AVOs, engaging the police there it changes, it's not very consistent, but it may be that the abusing or the abusive child living there is not actually perpetrating violence or even threatening to. And so they're just under the radar of being able to get the police to help, and that is a problem.
Okay.
Can I also add,
Yeah.
you might want to also think about the person that's the perpetrator in this situation. Maybe they're there as a carer, and they are overwhelmed with that caring role. So it might be about providing them with support as well, with information about how to get assistance, maybe giving them time out from the family home to be able to do things for themselves. So sometimes, yes, these things are happening in the home, but what's the background to that? What's actually going on? And it could be something just as not as simple, obviously, but as it could be, somebody just experiencing an overwhelming sense of ownership of this older person and having to do everything for them, that's eliciting that sort of behavior in them. So by giving them a bit of extra support, it might alleviate that situation for everybody. But as Mary
That's a great
said, just
point, Lynn.
always checking in with the person in the situation is helpful. So that's why I guess we all work together, because we all come from different perspectives and have different things that we can add to the client's situation. So, checking in with your other colleagues is very important, getting that support.
Thank you. So the next question I have here is when the elderly person is in a kind of Stockholm relationship and feels they need to cover up and defend the abuser, what can you do if you're seeing that? Is that one for you, Lynn? Or?
Very good question. Yes.
It's for Lynn.
Yeah, look, I guess in terms of, we'll separate that a little bit, because in terms of a Stockholm relationship or Stockholm syndrome, you're looking at somebody who's in a hostage situation, and whilst an older person might be isolated and, from everybody else and maybe feel like they're in a hostage situation, it's not quite sort of similar, because I guess, oh, there goes my lights. Oh, we're all live. Here we go. My lights had turned off. Sorry, he just had to stand up and
is
make
that
it
what
work
it
again.
was?
That's what was happening. Been sitting for too long. Sorry.
Yes.
So yeah, it's a very different sort of dynamic that's happening there. But I guess what we see more is the person entrenched in the family dynamic that's been happening for years. So there might be years of domestic violence and guilt that they might feel about their child's behavior and why they've, maybe using substances or, have a mental health issue. So similar to Alice's story, that just might be impacting that person's ability or to sort of move out of that situation, and why they continue to be there. If our family relationships are very diverse, it's very we have, relationships with our children, there's love there, even though there might be years of abuse that might have occurred. There's still a certain sense of connection. It's about that familiarity in our families and wanting to remain there. Sometimes the older person, might want to stay there because they don't want to go into an aged care facility, and that person providing them that support is the only person that's there for them, but they're also abusing them, feeling that, moving out of that sort of arrangement might be difficult. So there's a lot that interplay within that makes it much more, for us having, working in this area, we're sort of getting to understand that there's so many layers involved in elder abuse, that it's not just one particular thing, and the interconnected play with the family member, because we've got to remember back from what Mary had said, it's within a relationship of trust. So there's a lot of layered aspects of those relationships that it's so hard to unpack. It's hard to sort of, get in there and start to understand what's happening here.
And
So it is about.
Sorry.
No, I was just going to say it's about giving time to that person to tell their story.
Exactly.
Mary?
And also that's exactly right, about time. And I was just thinking, it's also about respecting that the older person may just choose not to see things that you on the outside see. And they may choose not to see those things for a whole lot of reasons. Some of those may be able to be unpacked and changed, but some may not be. And if that's the case, then, you have to respect what that older person has chosen to do and try and support them in that situation as best as you can. And I understand that's very difficult, because we see many instances where siblings are at war with what's happening to their parents, and their parents are stuck in the middle, and their parents are making decisions and compromises about what they consider important and not important, and that needs to be respected.
Okay, thank you. Someone was asking a question about whether you think that asking about elder abuse or questions around that should form part of an assessment whenever someone from us over a certain age calls a service. Like lawyers will ask establishing questions to determine capacity, that this might be something that services could do when talking to older people.
That's kind of really interesting, isn't it? Because I suspect if you asked most people straight out, are you experiencing elder abuse, they'd say no. So I think it's about the question that needs to be asked. And I know that in the toolkit, there's a number of ways that you can phrase that question that aren't just straight out, are you experiencing elder abuse? So they've actually got some conversations in that toolkit that can help guide you through interactions with older people to help elicit responses that more truly reflect the older person's situation.
Okay. Yes, so that toolkit, as we mentioned, is on as a handout on your control panel, and it's also, there's a link in the email following the webinar. So someone's written here, carers have conveyed the person they're supporting may convey to health professionals and incorrect information because of family dynamics. How can the carer provide their side without being judged as an abuser? So that's.
I don't know, Lynn, did you want to speak to that?
I need the question again, sorry, because it was.
Carers have conveyed the person they're supporting may come to health professionals may convey or may tell health professionals incorrect information because of family dynamics. How can the carer provide their side without being judged as an abuser? I'm not sure if they mean that the finger's being pointed at them when it's really another person in the
Something else that
family.
might be
If the
happening,
person,
or
yeah.
Yeah.
Look, you know, if it was a matter that ended up before the Guardianship Tribunal in NCAT, as Richard spoke about, they would reach out to all the people that are involved in the care of the older person and seek their, you know, honest and frank observations of both their, you know, of their interactions with the older person. I mean, I can only say that you should just put forward, you know, what your observations are. I guess the
And
law's always,
document.
and document them. And the law's always interested in perhaps not what you think or what you feel, but what you see and what you hear. So, you know, putting it in through the lens of objective facts makes it far less controversial, because it is just what you've seen, what you've heard, you know, your experiences, rather than what you think or what you feel is happening. I don't know. Do you think that's useful, Richard, to frame it like that? Frame it
Yes,
like
I
evidence.
do. Exactly. And really, it's rather burdensome, but as close in time as you can write down, document your recordings, your observations, the better. Courts take a lot of notice of that. If you do it a year later, when the allegation may arise, that doesn't carry nearly so much weight as doing it at the time. So if you suspect you are being set up, so to speak, what Mary says is the thing to do, and to do it at the time.
Another question here is, what about an older person who may be suspicious of elder abuse, but there's no basis because of an onset of maybe some health condition like dementia, and they're feeling out of control? How do you support a person or alleviate their concerns?
very tricky. Capacity is a big issue, isn't it, Mary, in our client group?
And often older people, as part of declining cognition or Alzheimer's, have a bit of paranoia around kind of what's happening around them. It's a natural thing. Did you want to speak more to that, Lynn?
Yeah, and I guess a lot of different illnesses can also sort of bring that around. People with a long history of depression and anxiety may also have sort of gaps and sort of paranoia, that, you know, gaps in memory, but also paranoia that comes up. You know, really just sort of listening and reassuring people is sort of the best step to just sort of definitely, you know, don't tell them that it's that what they're experiencing is not real. Sit with them and hear their story. So just taking those steps to be there with them.
And ensure that they're connected to the right medical services as well too, because there may be something that can assist them in terms of sort of medication or other treatment. As we said, elder abuse is a really complex thing, and it's not something that, you know, any one service can fix.
Okay. And someone's asked a question about are you working with the aged care crime prevention officers? Do you work in the aged care sector as well as home-based?
So New South Wales Police, you know, we're also a public agency that received funding to provide responses to elder abuse, and one of their responses was to set up these aged crime prevention officers. We don't have one on the Central Coast. We would love an aged crime prevention officer. We really would. But not having one, what we have done is worked with the aged crime prevention officers in terms of delivering training to them to help them understand what we see, and to help them understand what we see as the gaps and barriers for older people in speaking out about elder abuse.
Okay, thank you. Okay, well, I'm just conscious of time and needing to move forward. I don't think there's any other questions other than we can perhaps answer offline to some individuals. So I'll move us forward and just quickly mention the next slide coming up is about some more live webinars that we've got coming up in May in Law Week around your neighbours and the law and your money in the law. So you can join in with those if you want, and go to our website at Legal Aid New South Wales under workshops and webinars. You can find the links to those if you want to join in. So that's the end of our webinar, and I'd just like to thank all of you, Richard, Lynn and Mary, for your time today and sharing your knowledge about elder abuse. And obviously there's been some good questions, so it's something that people are really interested in. And we're getting lots of feedback saying fantastic webinar. Many thanks from our audience. So thanks again. And just a reminder to everyone that you'll get an email in about an hour with links to some resources we talked about today. And we'll follow up the webinar with some additional resources around talking to people over the phone, and also maybe some Centrelink links, because there were obviously some questions there as well. So we might be able to find some resources on that topic. Our email address at Legal Aid Community Legal Education Team is there on the screen, cle@legalaid.newsouthwales.gov.au. So if you're watching this webinar as a recording, you could send your questions to us and we'll pass them on to Mary, Lynn and Richard to respond. And don't forget, you can always call Law Access New South Wales on 1300 888 529 if you need free legal help. So we look forward to your attendance at our next Law for Community Workers webinar. I'll say goodbye, and goodbye to our speakers, and thanks everyone for your participation today.
Thanks, Kerry.
Okay,
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.